Hi, welcome to my Java tutorials for beginners. Last time we created your first Java program. I hope you can see the link to that tutorial in the top right. Today, we'll dive into variables and data types. A variable is a way of storing information in a computer program. Think of a variable like a container, and the name of the variable as the label on the container, which shows us what is inside. Variables are used to help understand, remember, and use the information in the program. Once a variable has been assigned, the name of the variable can be used to bring up the information it stores later on in the program. This means that you don't have to remember strings of information. In Java, there are two key components to declaring a variable: determining the type of data that is going to be stored in the variable and naming the variable. We can determine the type of the variable by first writing the data type we want stored in the variable. For example, if we were creating a game where a player has a certain number of lives, we would want to create a variable that stored the total number of lives that player has. Since that number can have only whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, we will use a type integer. About the data types, we will talk later. First, we specify the type of our variable. Then we give it a name or a label. This is also called an identifier because we use it to identify our variable. This equals sign is called the assignment operator, and 3 is the initial value that we are assigning to this variable. So we say we're initializing this variable, which means we're giving it an initial value. You always have to initialize your variables before reading them. And now we want to display the result of this variable on the screen. Let's say the player loses a life and now has 2 lives. We can change the value of a variable by assigning a different value to it. That we do not use the int keyword when assigning a new value to an existing variable. This is because we are not creating a new variable. Instead, we want to change the value original variable. Also here, we want to display the result of this variable on the screen. Let's run the program. You see, at first, the number of lives was 3 and then 2. This is what we wanted. We used here only one data type, integer, but Java has a rich set of data types. Data types in Java can be divided into two parts: privative and non-primitive. Primitive data types include byte, short, int, long, float, double, boolean, and char. Non-primitive data types include string, array, and classes. Primitive values do not share state with other primitive values and are completely discrete and autonomous. You can think of them as the building blocks for the non-primitive data types. Meanwhile, non-primitive types are those which refer to things and are thus termed reference types. As objects, non-primitive types can include methods that perform actions. There are a few other differences between primitive and non-primitive types, but we will cover those a little later on as we go over the primitive data types available in Java in more detail. Each primitive data type allocates a certain amount of memory and comes pre-initialized with its own default value. Byte. The byte data type is a very small 8-bit signed integer. The term signed means that it can represent both positive and negative numbers. It has a minimum value of -128 and a maximum value of 127 inclusively. Its small size makes it ideal for using in large arrays where the memory savings can be substantial. They can also be used in place of int, where their strict size limits may help to notify other developers that a variable is meant to store fairly small numbers, like a person's age. Its default value is 0. Short. With its 16-bit size, the short data type fits neatly between a byte and int. It has a much larger range of -32K to 32K. It is also great for managing memory and informing other developers about the kinds of numbers it may contain. Its default value is also 0. Int. The int data type is an interesting data type in that it can be either signed or unsigned. As a 32-bit signed integer, it can have a value from -2 billion to 2 billion. Its default value is 0. Long. The long data type has even more storage capacity than an int, requiring 64 bits. Like the int, the long type can also be signed or unsigned. Min and max value is minus 9 quintillion to 9 quintillion. I had 8 billion here now, but we have a red on the line that indicates an error. Let me hover our mouse over it. We see this tooltip. Integer number too large for int. What's going on here? The reason we're getting this error is that by default, Java sees these numbers as integers. So even though we have defined the type of this variable as long, Java compiler sees this value as an integer, and he thinks this value is too large for an integer. To solve this problem, we need to add a character L as a suffix. Float. The float data type is a 32-bit single precision floating point. While large enough to store fractional numbers up to 7 decimal digits, once the value gets past 6 decimal points, the number will become less precise and more of an estimate. Hence, if you require precise values such as for currency, you will need to use the big decimal class instead. Double. The double data type is a double precision 64-bit floating point, large enough for storing fractional numbers up to 15 decimal digits. It suffers from the same limitation limit as float does, and should therefore only be used if approximation errors are acceptable. Boolean. From the largest to smallest data type, the Boolean has only two possible values, true and false. It stores its value in a single bit. However, for convenience, Java pads the value and stores it in a single byte. One limitation of the Boolean data type is that, while fine for simple flags that track true and false conditions, it does not have an unset value, which can lead one to erroneously conclude that a value is false when it is really not set. Its default value is false. Char. The char data type stores one single 16-bit Unicode character. It has a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 65,535. Its default value is 0. Java has its own set of rules and conventions for naming variables. Here's what you need to know. Java is case sensitive. For example, age and age are two different variables. Variables must start with a letter, an underscore, or a dollar. Variable names cannot start with numbers. Variable names can't use whitespace. If we need to use variable names having more than one word, use all lowercase letters for the first word and capitalize the first letter of each subsequent word. When creating variables, choose a name that makes sense. For example, score and number makes more sense than variable names such as S and N. At this stage of learning, it's almost impossible to remember all data types at once, and it may seem difficult. However, over time, with practice and experience, you will gradually understand them better, and everything will become much clearer. So I hope this was interesting. Thank you for watching my tutorials. If you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe. See you later. Bye.